Captain Alina Rodriguez stood at the helm of the ESS Pathfinder, Earth's most advanced deep space research vessel, watching the dying star through the observation window. The massive red giant pulsed in angry crimson, its unstable corona throwing out solar flares that would have swallowed Earth whole. "Captain, we're detecting some unusual energy signatures from the third planet," Lieutenant Kai Chen reported from his sensor station. "They're not natural formations, definitely artificial, but unlike anything in our database." Alina frowned, studying the holographic display that materialized before her. The third planet shouldn't have had any signs of civilization. This star system had been marked as uninhabited for the past century by the Galactic Assembly surveys. Yet there they were, distinct energy patterns emanating from beneath the planet's surface. How did the Assembly miss this? She wondered aloud. "Dr. Patel, what's your analysis?" The ship's xenobiologist looked up from her own readings, her dark eyes wide with excitement. "Captain, these energy signatures, they're biological in nature. Whatever's down there, it's alive." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Assembly surveys were thorough to the point of being legendary. They didn't just miss things, especially not signs of intelligent life. "Ma'am," Kai's voice was urgent now. "The star's condition is worse than initial reports suggested. According to these readings, it's going to go nova within the next 6 months, not 2 years as previously calculated." Alina's decision was immediate. "Launch the probes. I want detailed scans of every inch of that planet, and get me a secure channel to Earth Command. Priority 1. Within hours, the Pathfinder's probes had revealed an extensive network of underground chambers spanning the planet's crust. But it was the visual feeds that left the crew speechless. The chambers were filled with light, not from artificial sources, but from the inhabitants themselves. The Lumini, as Dr. Patel would later name them, were beings of pure bioluminescence. Their bodies emitted a soft, ethereal glow that pulsed in patterns too complex to be random. They had built their civilization in harmony with their natural biology, creating vast chambers where their light could resonate and interact in ways that human science struggled to comprehend. "They're dying," Dr. Patel reported grimly, reviewing the biological data. "The star's radiation has been slowly poisoning their light-processing organs. They've retreated underground to survive, but it's only delayed the inevitable. When that star goes nova..." Alina completed the thought. "They'll all die." She turned to her communications officer. "What's the word from Earth Command?" Lieutenant Sarah O'Connor's expression was troubled. "They're conferring with the Galactic Assembly, Captain. The Assembly is claiming the Lumini were officially declared non-viable a century ago. According to their laws, intervening would be illegal." "Non-viable." Dr. Patel's voice cracked with disbelief. "They're an intelligent species with a complex civilization. How could they be declared non-viable?" The answer came 3 hours later, in the form of a classified file from Earth's archives. The Galactic Assembly had known about the Lumini. They had studied them, determined that saving them would be too resource-intensive, and simply written them off. They had even gone so far as to erase the Lumini from official star charts, condemning them to a slow death in the dark. Alina read the file twice, her hands shaking with barely controlled anger. "Get me Earth Command again. And this time, I want to speak to the Secretary General herself." The conversation that followed would later be marked as a turning point in human history. Alina laid out everything they had discovered, not just the existence of the Lumini, but the Assembly's deliberate abandonment of them. She spoke of the incredible achievements of their light-based technology, the beauty of their subterranean cities, and the crime of allowing such a unique species to vanish from the galaxy. Secretary General Adebayo's response was immediate and unequivocal. "The Assembly's laws be damned. We're not going to sit by and watch another Holocaust. Captain Rodriguez, you have full authorization to initiate first contact. Earth is mobilizing everything we can spare to assist. Just keep them alive until help arrives." The first meeting between humans and Lumini was unlike anything Elena had prepared for. The Lumini's language was entirely light-based, complex patterns of illumination that conveyed not just words but entire concepts in seconds. It took the ship's AI 3 days to begin decoding it, and another 2 to establish basic communication. The Lumini's story was both tragic and inspiring. They had known about their star's deterioration for generations. They had reached out to other civilizations, but the Assembly's verdict had been final. Resources that could save 1 billion Lumini could be better spent elsewhere, according to the Assembly's utilitarian calculations. So the Lumini had done the only thing they could. They had gone underground, using their natural bioluminescence and advanced knowledge of light energy conversion to create a self-sustaining ecosystem in the planet's crust. They had survived, generation after generation, watching their numbers dwindle as the star's radiation slowly poisoned them. We accepted our fate. Their leader, a being whose light patterns translated roughly to Dawnsinger, told Elena through the translator. We had no choice. Elena's response was firm. You have a choice now. Humanity doesn't abandon people to die. Not when we can help. The Lumini's response was a burst of light so bright it overloaded the ship's visual sensors, an expression of hope so pure it needed no translation. But as the Pathfinder's crew began the monumental task of figuring out how to save an entire civilization of light-based beings, a priority message arrived from Earth. The Galactic Assembly had officially censured humanity for interference. Sanctions would follow. Trade routes would be closed. Earth's emerging position in galactic society was at risk. Elena read the message to her senior staff, then looked at each of them in turn. Earth Command is giving us a choice. We can withdraw now, claim it was all a misunderstanding. Or we can do what's right and face the consequences. I won't make this decision alone. Dr. Patel spoke first. My grandfather survived a refugee camp. He told me stories about the nations that turned their backs and the ones that opened their doors. I know which side of history I want to be on. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Humanity had spent too long fighting its way to the stars to compromise its principles now. Elena nodded, feeling a fierce pride in her crew. Send word to Earth Command. The Pathfinder stands by her mission. And send a message to Dawnsinger. Tell them. She smiled. Tell them we're going to need to learn a lot more about how their light processing works, because we're not leaving until we figure out how to save every last one of them. As the message was transmitted, Elena watched the dying star through the window. Humanity's first major test in the galactic community would not be about military might or technological advancement. It would be about something far more fundamental, the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The real work was just beginning. The news broke across Earth like a tidal wave. Humanity wasn't alone in standing against the Galactic Assembly's decision. Within days of the Pathfinder's defiant message, ships from the fringe worlds, independent colonies and species who had rejected Assembly control, began arriving in the Lumini system. Dr. Maya Patel watched from her makeshift laboratory as another vessel dropped out of hyperspace, its hull bearing the distinctive markings of the nomad clans. In the 3 weeks since first contact, the star system had become a symbol of resistance against the Assembly's cold utilitarianism. They're calling it the Luminous Revolution, Lieutenant Sarah O'Connor said, reading from her datapad. Social networks across 17 species are lighting themselves up in Lumini patterns. The Assembly's trying to suppress the footage, but they can't keep up. Maya barely heard her, focused on the holographic display showing her latest test results. The Lumini's biology was unlike anything she'd ever studied. Their cells didn't just process light, they transformed it in ways that defied conventional physics. Understanding how they did it was the key to saving them. Any progress? Captain Rodriguez asked, entering the lab. She looked tired. The constant diplomatic negotiations were taking their toll. Maya gestured to the display. Their light processing organs aren't just damaged by the radiation. They're adapting to it. The Lumini have been unconsciously evolving, trying to survive. If we can accelerate that process, guide it, She was interrupted by a priority alert. The lab's screen switched to a live broadcast from the Assembly's central chamber. High Commissioner Vex, a towering insectoid being, was addressing the gathered representatives. The humans' actions threaten the very foundation of galactic order, Vex declared. Their emotional response to the Lumini situation demonstrates their species' immaturity. Effective immediately, all Assembly worlds are prohibited from trading with Earth or its colonies. The broadcast cut to scenes of Assembly enforcement ships seizing human vessels, confiscating cargo, and closing jump gates to human traffic. Earth's economy, still recovering from the costs of joining the galactic community, would be devastated. "They're trying to force us to back down," Elena said quietly. "Make helping the Lumini too expensive for us to continue." Maya thought of her grandfather's stories again, of nations that had claimed they couldn't afford to help refugees. "Then we'll find a way to make it affordable," she said firmly. The solution came from an unexpected source. The Lumini themselves, once they understood the sacrifice humanity was making, offered their greatest secret, the ability to manipulate light in ways that violated known physics. "We call it light weaving," Dawn Singer explained through the now refined translator. Their luminescence formed complex patterns that the lab's instruments struggled to record. "It is how we survived the darkness. Perhaps it can help Earth survive this darkness as well." Maya and her team worked feverishly to understand the principles behind light weaving. The Lumini could effectively program light itself, encoding information and energy in ways that could revolutionize everything from computing to power generation, if humanity could adapt this technology. But time was running out. The star's deterioration was accelerating, and the Assembly had begun military exercises near the system's edge. A clear threat. Earth's response came in the form of Operation Starbright. While Maya and her team worked to save the Lumini, engineers began adapting their light-weaving techniques to human technology. The first successful test came when a small research vessel equipped with Lumini-inspired systems slipped past Assembly blockades completely undetected. "They're looking for traditional engine signatures," the test pilot reported back. "The light-weave drive doesn't even register on their sensors." Within weeks, a shadow network of human ships was running vital supplies through the blockade, keeping Earth's economy alive while continuing to support the Lumini project. The Assembly's attempt to isolate humanity had instead forced them to develop technology centuries ahead of their time. But the real breakthrough came in Maya's lab. By combining human genetic engineering with Lumini light weaving, they found a way to accelerate the natural adaptations the Lumini had been developing. The process would allow them to survive in a wider range of environments, including aboard ships and stations. "We can save them," Maya announced to the packed briefing room. "But we'll need to evacuate the entire population before the star goes nova." Millions of Lumini, each requiring specialized containment to support their biological light weaving. The scope of the task was staggering. Even with the help of the fringe worlds, moving an entire civilization would take resources Earth could barely spare. The Assembly sanctions were biting deep, and public support, while still strong, was showing signs of strain. Then Dawn Singer made an announcement that changed everything. The Lumini had been using their time underground not just to survive, but to build. Deep beneath their planet's surface lay vast archives of their scientific and cultural achievements, including technologies that even the Assembly had never imagined. "We offer this freely to humanity." Dawn Singer's light patterns rippled with emotion. "Not as payment for our rescue, but as proof that the Assembly was wrong. Every civilization has value beyond mere resource calculations. Every species has something unique to offer the galaxy." The archive's contents would eventually revolutionize a dozen fields, from quantum computing to deep space navigation. But in that moment, what mattered most was the message it sent. Humanity's compassion had earned them not just allies, but friends who would stand with them against whatever came next. As Maya watched the first successful treatment of a young Lumini, their light growing stronger and more stable, she thought about the price of compassion. Earth had risked everything to save a species that the galaxy's greatest powers had written off as doomed. The Assembly had believed this would show humanity's weakness. Instead, it had revealed their greatest strength: the ability to look at an impossible situation and refuse to accept it, to find ways to help others even at great cost to themselves. The Lumini's light was growing stronger, and in helping them survive, humanity had begun to shine in a way that no sanctions or threats could dim. The first attack came without warning. An Assembly patrol ship fired on a human transport carrying vital medical supplies to the Lumini system. The transport's experimental light weave drive scattered the weapon's fire like sunlight through a prism, saving the crew, but the message was clear. The Assembly was done with diplomatic pressure. Admiral James Chen watched the incident replay on the Strategic Command holoscreen, his expression grim. 20 years in Earth's Space Force hadn't prepared him for this kind of conflict. The Assembly's ships were centuries more advanced than humanity's best vessels. In a conventional war, Earth wouldn't stand a chance. But this wasn't going to be a conventional war. "Show me the latest progress on Operation Starbridge," he ordered. The display shifted to a massive construction project taking shape in orbit around the Lumini homeworld. It looked like a spider's web made of light, an intricate network of energy conduits and habitat pods designed to support millions of Lumini during their evacuation. "The Lumini engineers are worth their weight in antimatter," reported Commander Yuki Tanaka, the project's lead architect. "Their light-weaving techniques have solved problems we thought were impossible. We're ahead of schedule." "The Assembly won't let us finish it," James said quietly. "Not now that they know what the Lumini archives contain." This was never about resources or regulations. They're afraid of what happens when humanity and the Lumini combine their knowledge. As if to prove his point, long-range sensors detected a massive Assembly fleet gathering at the edge of the sector. Their numbers were growing daily. On the Lumini homeworld, Dr. Maya Patel and her team worked desperately to accelerate their evacuation plans. The adapted Lumini were responding well to their new environments, but moving an entire civilization took more than just biological compatibility. Each family group needs to maintain specific light resonance patterns, Maya explained to the evacuation coordinators. Their cultural and social bonds are literally woven from light. Break those patterns, and we could destroy their entire society, even as we save their lives. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sarah O'Connor, studying Lumini communication patterns, discovered that their light weaving could be used to create vast networks of interconnected consciousness. The evacuation pods wouldn't just house the Lumini. They would link them together in ways that would preserve their community bonds. "It's not just a refugee fleet we're building," Sarah realized. "It's a new kind of civilization, one that exists in both physical space and light space simultaneously." The Assembly's first major move was subtle but devastating. Quantum viruses infected Earth's global networks, targeting financial systems and industrial controls. Markets crashed. Factories shut down. Food distribution networks faltered. Earth's response shocked everyone. They switched everything off. Centuries of digital infrastructure went dark in a coordinated shutdown. For 3 days, the planet returned to an analog age. When the systems came back online, they were running on Lumini lightweave protocols. The quantum viruses slid through them like shadows through sunlight, unable to find purchase in systems that operated on fundamentally different principles. "You cannot attack what you do not understand," Dawn Singer transmitted to the Assembly Council, their message broadcasted on all frequencies. "And you have chosen not to understand us." The Assembly's next move was more direct. A fleet of warships dropped out of hyperspace near the Starbridge construction site. Their demands were simple: surrender the Lumini archives and cease all evacuation efforts or face immediate military action. Admiral Chen's response was to activate Project Aurora. Hundreds of small ships, built in secret using Lumini technology, winked into existence around the Assembly fleet. They weren't warships. They were light weavers designed to do one thing: create. Before the assembly ships could fire, they found themselves encased in webs of living light. Their weapons couldn't penetrate barriers that existed partially in another dimension. Their engines couldn't break free of restraints that bent space-time itself. "We don't want to fight you," James transmitted to the trapped assembly ships. "But we will not let you condemn an entire species to death. Not again. Not ever." The standoff lasted 3 tense days. Assembly reinforcements arrived, only to find themselves equally unable to affect the light-weave barriers. Earth ships continued their evacuation efforts, protected by technology that rewrote the rules of physics itself. But the true victory came not from military action, but from communication. The Lumini, linked through their vast light networks, began broadcasting their story to every corner of the galaxy. Not just their near extinction, but their art, their science, their unique way of seeing the universe. Species across assembly space saw what was being lost, and what humanity was willing to risk to preserve it. The assembly's own citizens began questioning centuries of utilitarian policy. The fringe worlds, long dismissed as insignificant, proved that their independence had fostered innovation the assembly desperately needed. In her lab, Maya watched the latest batch of adaptation treatments complete successfully. Outside, the Starbridge grew steadily, its light-weave architecture defying traditional physics, while offering hope to millions. Earth's economy was adapting to its new technologies, becoming something unique in the galaxy, a hybrid of human determination and Lumini insight. "We're doing more than saving one species," she realized, watching young Lumini children play in waves of light that rippled through their new habitats. "We're showing the galaxy a different way to measure value. Not in resources or military might, but in the unique perspectives each civilization brings to the universe." The assembly fleet remained trapped, watching as humanity accomplished what they had deemed impossible. Sometimes, Maya thought, the greatest revolutions weren't won with weapons, but with the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that some things couldn't be changed. The light of hope, once kindled, proved impossible to extinguish. The star's death began with a whisper. Deep in its core, atomic reactions that had burned for billions of years started to falter. On the surface, massive solar flares whipped across space with increasing violence. The Lumini's home star was entering its final phase far faster than anyone had predicted. "We have weeks, not months," Captain Elena Rodriguez reported to the Emergency Council. The Pathfinder sensors had been monitoring the star's deterioration constantly. The radiation levels are already becoming critical. Operation Starbridge had evolved from a rescue mission into a desperate race against time. The massive evacuation fleet, a combination of human ships and vessels from the fringe worlds, worked tirelessly to transport Lumini families to the growing network of light-weave habitats. Dr. Maya Patel hadn't slept in days. Her team was working around the clock, using the adapted light-weave technology to maintain the complex biological and social needs of the evacuees. Each family group required precise calibration of their light resonance patterns to prevent the trauma of broken community bonds. "The children are adapting fastest," she noted, watching a group of young Lumini play in their new habitat. Their light patterns had already begun incorporating elements of the artificial environment, creating new forms of expression that merged their traditional culture with their new reality. But the assembly wasn't idle. Having failed to break through the light-weave defenses directly, they had switched to a new strategy. Assembly agents had infiltrated refugee processing centers, spreading fear and disinformation among the populations of worlds sympathetic to Earth's cause. The propaganda was clever. What if the Lumini's light-weave technology was too dangerous to share? What if exposure to their unique biology had unforeseen consequences? Ancient prejudices and fears began to resurface. Sarah O'Connor, monitoring communication channels, discovered the shift in public opinion first. "They're trying to turn everyone against us," she reported. "Make the galaxy fear the Lumini enough to support military action against the evacuation fleet." The situation reached a critical point when an assembly diplomatic vessel requested emergency docking with the Pathfinder. To everyone's surprise, the ship carried Counselor Venn, one of the Assembly's most influential members. "I come unofficially," the elderly Arcturian announced. "What I have to say must never be traced back to me." Their crystalline form trembled with either age or fear. The Assembly leadership is preparing to take direct action. They plan to trigger the star's collapse early. The revelation stunned the Emergency Council. Such an action would not only doom any remaining Lumini, but would create a supernova that could devastate nearby systems. The Assembly was willing to risk multiple genocides to prevent the spread of light-weave technology. Humanity's response was immediate and unprecedented. Earth Command activated the emergency broadcast network, connecting every human settlement, ship, and station in a single communication grid. The message was simple: we need everyone. Now, what followed would be remembered as the Great Convergence. Civilian ships of every size and type began arriving in the Lumini system. Private vessels, corporate transports, even long-haul cargo ships. Everyone who could carry even a single Lumini family volunteered. "We'll adapt," was the common refrain. "We'll learn the light weave patterns. We'll make room. Just tell us what they need to survive." The Assembly's leadership watched in growing alarm as their carefully maintained order began to crumble. Species that had been carefully kept separate for centuries were working together, learning from each other, growing stronger through cooperation rather than competition. Dawn Singer, monitoring the evacuation from the central Lightweave hub, made a decision that would change galactic society forever. They began broadcasting the complete Lumini archives, not just to Earth, but to every civilization that had offered help. Knowledge should illuminate all paths, they transmitted, not be hidden in darkness. The Assembly's worst fears were realized, but not in the way they had expected. As the Lumini's deep understanding of light and energy spread through the galaxy, it didn't create chaos. It created connection. Species that had never been able to communicate effectively before found new ways to understand each other through lightweave protocols. The star's condition continued to deteriorate, but now the evacuation had taken on an almost orchestral quality. Ships moved in perfect coordination, their actions guided by lightweave networks that linked human intuition with Lumini precision. What had begun as a rescue mission had become a symphony of cooperation. Maya, watching from her lab as another wave of refugees settled into their new homes, realized that humanity had done more than save a species. They had catalyzed a transformation. The Lumini's gift of light weaving had shown the galaxy that diversity wasn't just morally right, it was practically essential. "Every species brings its own light to the universe," she wrote in her journal. "Today we learned that when those lights combine, they don't dim each other. They create something brighter than anyone imagined possible." As the evacuation entered its final phase, the Assembly's threatened attack never came. Too many of their own member species had joined the rescue effort, moved by the sight of countless civilizations working together in harmony. The old order was changing, not through force, but through the simple power of cooperation and compassion. The light of hope had become a beacon that no amount of fear could extinguish. The day their star died, every Lumini in the galaxy pulsed with a shared light pattern, a farewell to their ancestral home. Through the vast light-weave network that now connected their scattered habitats, millions watched as the supernova blazed across space, briefly outshining every other star in the sector. But this end marked a beginning. 5 years after Operation Starbridge, the galaxy had changed in ways the Assembly's ancient bureaucracy was still struggling to comprehend. Captain Elena Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez, stood on the observation deck of humanity's new diplomatic station, watching ships from a dozen species navigate through the light-weave guidance systems that had become the standard for interstellar travel. "Hard to believe it all started with one distress signal," Sarah O'Connor said, joining her at the window. The former communications officer now headed the interspecies cultural exchange program. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we followed the Assembly's rules." "Someone else would have found their courage eventually," Elena replied, though she wasn't entirely sure. The Assembly's utilitarian approach had dominated galactic politics for so long that most species had forgotten there were alternatives. In her laboratory aboard the station, Dr. Maya Patel was meeting with a group of young Lumini scientists. Their light patterns danced with excitement as they discussed their latest breakthrough, a way to use light weaving to heal psychological trauma across multiple species. The patterns of consciousness are not so different, one of them explained. They're light-forming complex equations in the air. Whether made of light, flesh, or crystal, all minds seek harmony. The Lumini had not just survived, they had thrived. Their habitats had evolved into great cities of light, where physical architecture merged seamlessly with their light-weave technology. Other species had begun establishing their own neighborhoods within these cities, drawn to the unique possibilities of living in spaces that responded directly to consciousness and emotion. But perhaps the most profound change had come to the Assembly itself. The revolution hadn't torn down the old order, it had transformed it. Dawn Singer, now serving as the first Lumini representative to the Assembly Council, had introduced a new way of measuring civilizational value, not by resources or military might, but by unique perspective and potential contribution to galactic knowledge. Every species is a lens through which the universe understands itself, they would often say, their light patterns reflecting off the council chamber's crystal walls. When we let any perspective be lost, we blind ourselves to some part of truth. The Assembly's younger members had embraced this philosophy enthusiastically. The old guard had resisted at first, but it was hard to argue with success. Worlds that adopted light-weave technology and the principles of cooperative development were experiencing unprecedented growth and innovation. Humanity's role had evolved as well. Earth had become known not for its military or economic power, but for its ability to bridge differences between species, to find ways to help vastly different civilizations work together. They were the mediators, the problem solvers, the ones who could look at an impossible situation and find hope. We learned as much as we taught. Admiral Chen often said in his speeches to new recruits, "The Lumini showed us that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we imagined. Our job isn't to conquer it or control it, but to help it grow." The changes weren't without challenges. Some species still clung to old prejudices and fears. There were still conflicts, still misunderstandings, but now there was also a framework for resolving them, based on the principle that every perspective had value. In the new Lumini cities, children of various species played together in parks where light itself responded to imagination. They grew up taking for granted the idea that different forms of life could coexist and enrich each other. To them, the Assembly's old philosophy of calculated abandonment seemed like a relic of a darker age. Maya, watching these children play, often thought about the message humanity had sent to the galaxy, not through grand speeches or military might, but through simple, stubborn compassion. They had looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept it, and in doing so, they had shown everyone a better way. The light weave network that connected Lumini communities now stretched across thousands of worlds, carrying not just communication but understanding. It was a living testament to what could be achieved when species chose to help each other, to value each other's unique gifts. As the galaxy spun on into an uncertain future, one thing had become clear. The true measure of a civilization was not its age, or its technology, or its military might. It was its capacity for compassion, its willingness to reach out to others in need, its ability to see value in differences rather than fear them. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society hadn't been technology or resources. It had been the simple, powerful idea that no one should be left behind, that everyone deserved a chance to shine. And in the light of that truth, a new age had dawned.